Hello everyone, welcome to our budget special. So it's 3 p.m. on Monday the 1st, so you'll be watching this slightly later on today, which means we're recording as live, so no swearing tea. And hopefully if we mess up any lines like that, then just forgive us. We're joined today by Helen Miller, Director of the IFS, and we've also asked the audience for questions. I think I'm going to call this new media at its finest, in the sense of the people at home get to ask you questions rather than just watch you sat on the news.
Can't
which
wait.
I think is going to be amazing. We started with some biscuits.
Always.
Because you bought them last
I
time.
started biscuits, yeah.
Fancy
Oh, well, you've upped
biscuits.
it. You've upped the
These
bar.
These are ginger biscuits. I hear they're very good.
Wow.
These are my favourite shortbread.
Oh, you've
I
got
do
two
love a
boxes of
shortbread.
biscuits.
Oh, hold on.
I love it.
And these are Crinkle's plantain chips from my cousin's business. And he sent us some for free to test out on the podcast. So,
Can you dip them into tea is what we need to know.
I mean, I think they might be a little bit too small, but you can dip
Sprinkle
anything
them in.
into tea.
I bought some biscuits.
Oh, wow.
I'm not being upstaged by this guy. So I bought 48 Tonics caramel wafers. Technically a biscuit. It says biscuit on the front. I bought 48.
Is it a biscuit for VAT purposes?
Well, yeah.
That's ridiculous.
A few have gone. I bought 48 because I needed some headroom, knowing that a few wouldn't make it.
Yeah, you ate 8 of them,
Budgeted
didn't
to
you?
lose a few. I ate 10 on the way down. So yeah, there you go.
Well, sport for choice now.
These are Scottish.
Yeah, like it.
And they're amazing. Do you know them? Caramel.
Yeah, everyone does.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
grew up with these. They're kind of the things you had when you were kids, right?
Exactly.
It's an
Exactly.
excessive
So
amount
yeah,
of
Very
biscuits.
impressed.
none of us are going to eat any of this
Yeah.
because
Well, now for the next time I come, I have to up the game even more and bring something even more extravagant next time. The
Yeah.
cream cakes or something.
yeah.
Anyway. Love it. Love a good biscuit.
So we'll share those out later. I wanted to talk first of all. I was watching the budget and I turned on and the pre-chat and you were on the news, and then the OBR leaked the report prior, and I couldn't help but just feel sorry for you. I think you handled it really well, but I was imagining, God, this is a curveball you just don't need on live TV.
Yeah.
How was that?
Wild is what I said at the time. Absolutely wild. So we were sitting, live, chatting about what's about to be in the budget. The sort of pre-chat, and then we suddenly just got a message saying the OBR's, accidentally published the document. Here's the document, and you've got 2 minutes. And we're going to come to you live, and you're going to analyse the budget and announce the budget, which is crazy. I mean, luckily I've looked at many budget documents in the past, so I sort of knew what to look at. But it's like doing a very high stakes exam live on TV. It's like, can you read an EFO very quickly and announce the headlines? It's also strange because it should have been Rachel Reeves announcing those things. So, just sitting in live and thinking, should I even be doing this?
Well, there's a pressure that you might affect things because you're in that moment. You are the Chancellor. You're delivering it for many people, and people could watch you, and you could move the bond market.
Yeah, there's absolutely. There's market sensitive information in there. People are working things out. I mean, the thing is, at that point, once it's live, it's circulating. Someone's going to talk about what's in it. You might as well talk about what's in it, I guess. But it was absolutely bizarre. I mean, what was for me, what was obvious really quickly, partly because of the way the document's written, is that in some sense the big headline news that no one expected is that the Chancellor didn't have a big fiscal repair job on her hands. So everyone had said going into this that the forecasts from the OBR, the official watchdog, were going to be really important. And everyone expected her to have been handed a fiscal repair job, a big deficit that she needed to fulfil. And what was really apparent really quickly is that it kind of hadn't been there. We can talk through why if you like, but in some sense that framed the rest of the analysis because the budget, the background to the budget wasn't what everyone expected. She'd been handed a much less bad set of fiscal forecasts than everyone had thought she was going to get going into that.
Why do you think she teed it up then in a way? Because the messaging coming out, there was almost like a public service announcement about income tax that then got pedalled back, and it all seemed very doom and gloom leading into it. Yeah,
it does look now particularly strange. The kind of breakfast TV interview the speech that Rachel Reeves gave looks very strange. I mean, before that, start of the year, everyone knew that the office budget responsibility was going to look again at its productivity assumptions. It had been more optimistic on the future path of productivity than most other forecasters, and therefore everyone, including us, expected that they would downgrade productivity. And they did. It cost the government something like 16 billion in receipts from that downgrade. So that did happen. Just that what nobody else expected was that there were two other moving parts of the forecast. And this underlines how forecasting a £3 trillion economy is difficult. And numbers like 10, 20, 30 billion that sound big to us, actually in those fiscal terms are kind of small. What people didn't expect was partly there was a bigger increase in spending than anyone expected on disability and special educational needs, but also there was this big 30 billion increase in tax revenues, partly because of the OBR assumption about inflation. And when you've got all thresholds frozen in the tax system, fiscal drag means you get more people paying more tax. So that worked in the Chancellor's favour. And the OBR think that the composition of growth will be more towards wages and less towards profits. And because we tax wages higher than profits, that's given her a return. And pull that together, basically, the productivity downgrade was there, but this kind of what rode to the rescue out of the clear blue was this big increase in revenues. So there wasn't this big fiscal repair job. But Rachel Reeves knew that before she went on the TV doing that funny speech. And on one hand, I think it was fine for her to talk about the productivity downgrade. That was true. But what she wasn't talking about was this other thing in revenue. So looking back, I mean, why did she do it? I don't know. It looks a bit maybe like testing the water for an income tax rise, that I guess they tested the water and decided it was not going to happen. But it does look more doom and gloom than you might have expected, knowing now what she knew then.
Do you think that she's sort of trying to get a bit of pain out of the way to get the headroom so that she can make manoeuvres in terms of spending and stuff later on? That she thinks let's rip the Band-Aid off now and...
Yeah, possibly. So one of the single biggest things she did in this budget was give herself more wiggle room, more headroom against her fiscal rules. You know, she had 10 billion of this wiggle room last year. She now has 22. That's actually still not historically very high. Sort of 30 was more normal back in the 2010s, but it's higher, and it gives her basically more things can go wrong before she has to course correct. So maybe this was trying to warm up people to the idea that something needed to happen. In some sense, the problem is that I think she could have communicated that more clearly and been more forthright about the, things. There are reasons you want headroom. We're going to raise taxes to build headroom so that we don't have all this policy speculation and volatility, and that's why I'm doing it. I think what she gave the impression of is that things are really bad and I have to do something. And actually, I think there was more of a choice embedded in what she did than it maybe sounded like from that breakfast speech.
It's been doom and gloom since the moment they got in. I think everyone wanted positivity from it. It's like, new government, let's go. And she's like, oh, it's really bad. I was like, oh, no. We should explain why we're wearing hats.
Oh, yeah. I had a terrible haircut. I'm thinking about taking legal action on my barber. It's not even my barber. I took a new barber. Never cheat on your barber. And Damien's just got bad hair.
I had a hair transplant in the UK, and we're wearing hats in solidarity, but it just so happens it's Maine.
And I missed the hair memos, the hat memos.
You've got a bike helmet, you said.
Yeah, actually, but putting that on feels a bit like a bit of a plonker, so I've decided to go with the no hat thing. But
yeah.
Next time I'll try and do the dress code matching.
Like you're really missing out. Yeah. Poor you. No, okay. I think that brings us on to the first listener's question. If you want to go through that, mate.
Great name. Labradors are good dogs, has asked. Great name.
They're great dogs, yeah.
They are great dogs.
No, they're good.
Oh, they're good dogs. All right. If you saw this budget and didn't know anything about the party that published it, or any of the marketing around it, which party would you say had made this budget, and what would you say are their values?
Yeah.
And goals?
Yeah, great. So I think that's actually a bit of a harder question to answer than it might sound like. I mean, look, on the face of it, the kind of initial answer sounds like it's a Labour budget, because the main giveaway was the removal of the 2-child limit. So basically higher welfare payments to families on low incomes with more than 2 children. And it was a big tax raising budget. The government also had a big increase in welfare spending kind of underlying, and it accommodated that. So it sort of allows spending to increase. And those are clearly things that are more associated with Labour. But I think a couple of caveats. One is that Rachel Reeves did increase the headroom by a lot. That's kind of like a small c conservative thing to do in some sense, the kind of fiscal prudence, keeping the house in order. It's also worth winding back a few years, and under the Conservatives, we also saw rising disability spending, rising welfare spending in some other areas, and actually pretty big tax increases in the last couple of years. I mean, not entirely, some tax cuts too, but it wasn't just the case that the Tories always cut and the Labour increased. And I think part of that, there are some underlying pressures that all governments of any colour would have faced around, for example, rising disability or rising ageing. And in some sense, once you've got those pressures, tax rises are the way to accommodate them. So look, I think this was in part, and actually the government's saying this, a Labour budget in the sense that they were finding some more tax rises to do some more welfare spending. But most of the tax rise went not on more spending, but on this building the buffer into the public finances. And I think that's something that either party could have done. I mean, flip that on its head. I mentioned earlier, we used to have a case in the 2010s where sort of 30 billion-ish was more normal as a headroom. It was actually Jeremy Hunt was the first chancellor to cut that down to 10 billion, and then Rachel Reeves stuck with that lower level. So again, the kind of low headroom has been a feature under both of those governments. So I think it's a bit less obvious than it might sound because of those other factors in the forecast.
Does that mean then, if you're saying that the tax rises are welfare spending and headroom, that we're not going to see improvements in public services as a result of these tax rises? Because I think that's what the UK public kind of expect.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, the best, I think maybe one thing you could argue is that if the headroom brings us a greater period of stability and less volatility, that could have payoff in terms of policy not moving all over the place. But that's pretty second order. If anything, actually, what the government did in this budget was for like departmental spending, so day-to-day spending on public services, they actually cut that back in a couple of years' time. Now, what they're saying is that they'll find efficiency measures that mean that actually they won't change the quality of services. They'll just pay less for the same service, but they haven't found them yet.
Oh, yeah, sure.
They're gonna. And they just did a spending review this summer where they said they found lots of efficiencies. They've already penciled those in. They now think that in 2027, when they do another big review of public services, they'll find more efficiency savings, and that will free up some cash. So if they do, great, we should all hope they do. But if they don't, that will just translate one for one into worse public services. Now, for this budget, it was partly a tax to spend on welfare budget, and it was partly a tax to bank it budget on public finances. You shouldn't, the public services were not improved as a result of this particular budget.
The welfare spending is already the biggest spend if you include state pension as that kind of bracket of welfare. Is it right to be continuing to spend more money on that area of the economy, which is kind of a lot of it's not productive or frontline in terms of improving how easy it is for workers to do their things and grow the economy?
Yeah. So I think there's always basically a political choice about how much you spend on welfare, whether it's working age welfare or for older people. So there's not a right answer. But the design of those systems matters a lot. And it's not just about how much you spend, it's about who you're spending it on and how you're sharing it across people. I think given that we have a situation where with both disability benefits and with the funding that goes to children with special educational needs, they are rising so quickly that no matter how much you want to spend overall, it has to be right that you look at those systems and ask, is it working for the people it's trying to serve? Are you getting the money to the people that you want to help with the disabilities? Is it well targeted to helping those people in the best ways possible? Do you want to reshape it? And a government might say, yes, I want to spend exactly that amount of money on these people. But the idea that it's a perfect system, it's not. I mean, special educational needs is an example where so that spending has been going up enormously. I mean, local governments are racking up eye-watering amounts of debt related to these special educational needs bills. No one is happy with that system. Parents aren't happy, teachers aren't happy, children are not getting good outcomes. So again, whatever you're spending, there needs to be reform of that area. So right now, I mean, this government did try to reform disability. It failed to get it through past its backbenchers. It's now got a review of disability. We'll need to see what that comes up with. They're going to put out a paper, like an ideas paper on special educational needs. We need to see that. But I think whatever government you are at this point, you have to be looking at reform of those systems and making sure they're going to work. If only because, as I say, when a bill is rising that quickly, you have to ask whether it's serving a purpose.
Tangent, why are they rising so quickly?
That's a great question. So there's a few things going on. Partly, it might be some underlying increase in need. So people are having more of the kinds of conditions that get you onto one of these benefits. Partly, it might be that people are, the cost of living is hard. Maybe you're more likely to apply for one of these benefits in the first place. We're actually doing some work at the moment on the special educational needs system for children, because that's a bit of a complex one. Partly, it will just be, there are more children with speech and language needs or autism spectrum disorders.
We now recognise those
We
conditions.
recognise them. We didn't used to recognise them. We now do. And therefore, once you recognise it, the people get the support they need. But it's also, at least around the edges, there's a kind of a question about how much of it is actually parents fighting really hard. Not all of them. Some of them fighting hard, because also once you get into this system, you get to choose your first pick of school, for example. So I think there's more work to be done on that one in particular to pick out what's happening. But let's imagine if it's all actual need, it's all actually children need extra support. There's still a question of when you've got that many children in this system? Is it right? Currently what happens, you get into this system and a pot of money then follows that child through the school system. That's one way of doing it. But actually, some of these children, yes, some of them will need special educational facilities. Some of them actually could be in mainstream school. And then it's about, okay, how do you best support those children in the mainstream stream? Then you think about teacher training and facilities at school and other ways of providing that choice. So there's not one answer. It's not just a simple answer to why it's happening, but the government needs to work out why it's happening and how best to do it, and then also take an active decision about what to spend rather than just watching the numbers run away.
Another area of increase or spending was the minimum wage stuff. How do you guys see that?
Yeah, so minimum wage is always tricky. I mean, you're always trying to balance on the one hand wanting to sort of support lower income workers and give them sort of power in the labour market, and on the other hand wanting to watch really quite closely the employment effects that has, because you don't want a minimum wage that's so high that people just don't get jobs anymore. The particular issue around the minimum wage for younger people, I think, is interesting because, again, as you've had the minimum wage go up, you're going to put the price of young people up. I think there is reason to be concerned. Let's see what happens. But if you put the price up, you get fewer young people getting jobs. If you've got a company that can choose between a younger person and an older person with more experience, and they're the same price, you'd go for the person with more experience. So in some sense, people have been pleasantly surprised that so far the increase in minimum wage in the UK haven't led to big employment effects. We haven't seen lots of unemployment as a result of the minimum wage. But I think it's one of those things you have to watch really carefully and closely and make sure you don't go too far and start pricing people out of jobs.
What's the scariest word in the English language, Tremaine?
Tax.
How does it make you feel, mate?
Stressed, sweaty palms, squeaky bum time. Don't
Mum's
like
spaghetti.
it. Mama's spaghetti. Yeah, exactly. You got one shot, one
yeah.
opportunity to not go to jail for avoiding tax. No, I don't like tax. It's scary.
Tax can be really stressful, which is why we're excited about our partnership with TaxZap. They started in Ireland and now they're in the UK, and they make self-assessments way less scary.
What I like is how quick it is. You just enter your info, connect your bank, and it helps you do your expenses to reduce your tax bill. You suddenly know exactly what you owe, no waiting around for an accountant to reply, and you can file in as little as 15 minutes.
Yeah, and it's built for all kinds of people. Company directors, freelancers, the self-employed, side hustlers, or even people who work full-time who need to do a self-assessment. For example, anyone who needs to claim back high rate tax relief on their pension at work.
The HMRC recognise, so they're safe to use. Plus, TaxZap flags reliefs and benefits you might miss, so you're not leaving any money on the table.
And they're really reasonable too. So from just £89, you can have your self-assessment sorted. If you've got to do one this year, check out TaxZap. You can get 10% off as well using the code in the link in the description. The code is MONEY10, so that's MONEY10. Yeah, because with that minimum wage point, I don't want to make sweeping statements here, but me at 18 was not worth me at 25 versus 35. Experience is valuable, and also just the kind of the naivety and the hand-holding I needed at that point. And now I meet lots of 18-year-olds. I've got a 21-year-old lad who works for me who's exceptional. So I don't want to paint broad strokes, but it seems like they're racing that level up to a point where everyone is on a similar kind of minimum wage that doesn't reflect the fact that different people have different levels of experience.
The case for having a lower minimum wage for younger people is exactly that point. They have less experience. They need to kind of get into the labour market, learn some things. And actually for them, it could be a good deal to get in at a lower earnings, then you work up. And of course, there's nothing to stop employers paying young people more. So if you find a cracking 21-year-old, great. In order to hang on to him, you might have to pay him a higher wage because he'll be competitive in the labour market. So it's a floor, not a cap. But I think, that is going to be the concern as we see it work through the system and see, is it going to mean lower unemployment for young people? I think it's one to watch.
Okay. Do you want to ask the next one there, mate? Luke's, we've probably answered it.
Yeah.
Ask the question just in case.
That's a good one, yeah. Luke asked, which groups do best from the budget and the current status quo?
I think we highlighted the benefits and the minimum wage, but do you see anyone else? Or?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of there aren't many giveaways. So there's the 2 child limit. So that for a small number of families, that will be a really big deal because it's an extra £3,500 per child for those who are now eligible for the extra support. There's a bit of an energy prices, which in the short run most people benefit from. In the longer run, it's actually really small beer. So not much going there. The losers, whoever's paying more tax, that's the losers. The status quo, I think, is a bit harder because obviously status quo is compared to what. Take tax, the thing I know most about. there is a world in which the Chancellor could have done more reforming of tax and could have taken some tax away from some people and redistributed it. But the devil's in the detail there about exactly how it would be going. And one thing I would say, in some sense, we are all losers from having a tax system that's more distortionary than it needs to be. So if the Chancellor changed taxes, we could work through the winners and losers from a particular reform. But the fact that we have a tax system that is really complex, that's more distortionary on savings and investment incentives than it needs to be, ultimately drags on everyone's living standards and growth. So in some sense, we're all losers from the status quo, even though there will be some specific winners or losers for any particular measure.
Okay. There's a question here. I don't know if it's actually come from someone or not, but the question reads, what score would you give the government out of 10 for their budget, how brave they were, and did you want more from them?
Yeah, these are always tough questions to ask. I mean, the pedant in me always wants to say, what's the marking scale? What are you comparing it to? I mean, look, it's not a car crasher budget, right? I've seen worse budgets. And there are some good things. I think the higher headroom is to be commended. It's politically tricky to do. You have to raise more taxes than otherwise to basically buy nothing. Right? The Chancellor's raised an extra 22 billion of tax that does nothing other than raise the headroom. That's a difficult political sell. So credit to her for that's a bold move. There are little bits on the tax side, like, and we can talk about the details, but introducing a new tax on electric vehicles. Something needs to be done there. They've done something. A new tax is a bit bold, so you could say that. But look, overall, do I think they need to do more? Yes, in short. Because if you look at our big problem is the lack of growth. There's not one lever that pulls up growth. You have to do the hard yards across lots of different policy areas. I think you'd be throwing the kitchen sink at it, which means that every opportunity you do something that starts to notch things up. And you look at that budget, and it's not a growth budget. It's it's a bit of a fiscal repair job budget, bit of a tax and spend budget, not a big growth budget. So I don't know what mark I'd give it. So not a fail, but certainly not an A+. I mean, this is a kind of sometimes a comfort zone budget. The Chancellor did something. She kind of got away with it. No one's thrilled about it. No one's too unhappy. But I can definitely imagine a more exciting budget.
Oh, yeah. That growth ties into our next listener's question from David. He asks, has Rachel Reeves given up on economic growth? I see very few pro-business policies.
Yeah. Well, she continues to say that it's the number one mission. So in some ways, if I was giving the spin for the government, which is not my job, but if I was giving the spin for the government, then they say it's the number one mission. And they could point to the fact that this budget didn't do very much, but they did, over the whole Parliament, they're doing a lot more investment, public sector investment. They've got a big industrial strategy. They're reforming planning. The OBR says that those things will push up growth in the forecast. They haven't done nothing. They are doing some things, and give credit to them for that. But they're also doing lots of other things that pull against it, that or in the other direction. And so in some ways they've missed the opportunity to do even more for growth. So what I've said before is that I'd love to see the government take every opportunity, or at least more opportunities, to really push up on growth, because of this point that there isn't just an easy button that you go press for growth. If it was, anyone would have found it, right? You have to do things that are hard, and you have to do lots of things that are hard to start moving the dial. So, whether that be education or competition or regulation or tax or whatever else, you have to keep doing things. So, I don't think the government is doing a convincing job on that. Another thing I think they're not doing actually is a very good sales job on what they are doing. So I mentioned if I was selling for the government, but I don't think the government have set out a very clear vision for how they see themselves as trying to improve growth. Like, what's their theory of change? Where do they see what they're doing? How does it all fit together? And I think because voters don't understand that, they don't see the vision, I think it's hard for them to get behind what the government's doing. So in part, I think the government has kind of lost the narrative in some sense. They're on the back foot responding to things rather than being out there saying, we've done X, Y, and Z for this reason, and we're going to do this next, and it's all part of a vision people understand. It's not helped by the fact, by the way, that since they've come into government, they keep changing what are they like. They had 5 missions at some point. Then they had maybe 3 pillars. Then they had something else. And then even I've lost track of
these sort of rebranding.
And then they had this one was about cutting waiting lists, cutting national debt, and cutting something else. So there's always the new rebranding, which means that if I can't keep up and I'm seeped in this stuff, nobody else is keeping up either. So I think it's about something about actually just being able to communicate to people what it is you're trying to do.
Well, I mean, if you push the budget back to the very basically last day that you can do it, and then you kind of every other week it feels like you're leaking something or coming out and saying something and backpedaling, it's going to give everyone no confidence that you don't even know what you're doing in the next month, let alone in the next years. And it does feel like they lurch from fiscal event to fiscal event and are just kind of going, what the hell can we do?
Yeah, I think all the speculation we had in this budget has been really damaging, both in terms of kind of people, businesses hold back decision making when they don't know what's going to happen. But also, I think, as you're alluding to, the sense of just uncertainty that it creates. People don't really know what's happening. It feels like everything's up for grabs. You know, small taxes that are usually the preserve people like me talk about in nitty gritty podcasts actually now have become mainstream. We're talking about all these different bits and pieces. I think it gives the impression that everything's up for grabs, anything might change, there's not really a clear plan. And that, I think, in and of itself is damaging. It also takes up a huge amount of bandwidth. I mean, the government, the Treasury, people like us are all talking about what she may or may not do. Why aren't we talking about the other things like how to deal with ageing or net zero or productivity in the public sector or the list of other things we could talk about? So I think this speculation, which is always in front of budgets, every budget I've ever worked on for the last 18 years has some speculation in advance of it. And in some sense, debate about what the government might do is good. I'm not against debate, obviously, I in that business. But I've never seen a budget like this that has more speculation about what may or may not happen. And I think that's come at a cost.
Has that come from inside the government, do you think, or have the media just kind of hit bullseye?
I think it's come from a few things. So I think it's partly the government, partly the things like the Rachel Reeves speech that we talked about, where as you listen back to it, it was a very funny speech. It was kind of a speech that said nothing in some sense, but that led everyone to think that what she was saying is that the world's worse than we thought, we might raise income tax. But she didn't say either of those two things, really. So it wasn't the finest piece of clear communication. So partly the government has been testing the water about different things and adding to this. Partly it is the media speculating about things. Actually, there's a whole cottage industry now of companies that have been trying to work out what the headroom's going to be and what the fiscal rules are going to look like. I think it's partly the combination of the decision that Rachel Reeves gave herself that tiny headroom. Once she had that, everyone knew that small change could blow her off course. And that's why everyone sort of knew it was worth speculating, because she might have been blown off course. Also, those tax locks that she had going into the election. Once she'd said, I'm not going to do much on income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax. Once you've ruled out the big things, that's why you're getting speculation about all the little things she might do. I think it's a kind of toxic combination of tying your hands really severely, having real headroom, not going ahead with the disability cuts. Again, the Chancellor had already got rid of a lot of her headroom. Once they said they couldn't get the disability cuts and the winter fuel payments through Parliament, that was already 6-7 billion that people knew that she'd lost. I think that also fed into this sense of well, she's going to have to do something. What's she going to do? I think it's all those things combined have meant this has been a particularly bad time for speculation.
And when you don't have a broad tax rise like income tax, you give rise to small interest groups to really get noisy, I guess. Because everyone's thinking, oh God, my buy-to-let or my farm, and they raise the noise. Yeah,
but lots of little groups, each of which worry about what's going to happen to them. They all talk about it. It's also the case that just mechanically, if you just look at, what are the big tax bases? It's income and spending. And if you want to tax a smaller tax base, capital income or farms or interest, it's just mechanically harder to raise a lot of money. So you either have to raise a small tax by a lot, and that worries people, or you have to do what Rachel Reeves has done and raise lots of taxes, lots of little taxes by a lot. So again, you're into the world of just more things being affected than if you just did one big tax.
I think the mansion tax is kind of the amount of noise it attracted versus how much it raised.
Yeah, really small.
It dominated the headlines, didn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think of that tax?
So I think if you want to tax, I think a few things. If you want to tax people with wealth, richer people, actually taxing their properties rather than their income is less distortionary than taxing their labour supply. Something to be said for that. The background, the fact that council tax, we all know it's out of date, based on 1991 values, which is absurd. It's regressive, meaning that people at the top pay a smaller share of their property values than people at the bottom for no particularly good reason. Not that it has to be progressive, but regressivity is very hard to defend. So I think you can make a case for doing something at the top. I don't love that it's a new bolt-on tax and that now we basically have two property taxes. We have council tax that's still based on 1991 values and is still regressive, plus this new bolt-on tax that will be based on new values. But now we have those new values, we won't use them for council tax. That's really bizarre in my mind. And it adds a lot of complexity. And it's quite a lot of complexity for not very much money, like you said. In public finances terms, it's a rounding error. So if it were a step towards a better council tax, we revalued, we did it properly, made it proportional rather than regressive, I'd be really happy. I sort of fear that I'll still be here in 5 years' time saying, we've got two property taxes, one is based on 1991, one is based on 2026, and it's just a bit of a mess, honestly.
And they haven't indexed the value, so now loads of people that are getting dragged into it that weren't, and in 20 years' time, everyone's living in a £2 million house or something. And
so yes, but maybe they won't. Maybe what they'll do is just say, well, your house was worth this in 2026, and it'll just be that forever. I mean, so we're still basing our tax on 1991 value, so how long will this one last?
The year
I don't know.
6000 and we're still...
Exactly. At what point will we just say that actually 1991, that was so far away that it has to change? So look, I don't think, as taxes go, it's not the most distortionary. You can make a case for fixing property taxes. What I don't love is, I say, the bolt. I mean, people ask me with increasing frequency, why have we got a tax system that is this long and complex? And this is the answer in some sense, that when politicians come along, they want to do something, rather than fix what we've already got, they shove something else on top and they tweak them. Rather than just be like, okay, let's just revalue this and redo it properly. You bolt things on. Before you know it, you've got a tax system that looks like it's a tax system, so the thing's bolted on for the last 60 years.
It's the same with the cash ISA stuff and now the changes they're suggesting on stocks and shares ISAs. Okay, T, talk to me about your attitudes towards risk.
I mean, I like a bit of risk in my investments, but I definitely would say since the podcast, I've toned it down a little bit, not quite as gung-ho and carefree as I was in risk. So yeah,
shooting from the hip all the time, weren't you? Yeah. I think personally that you should take risks, but it should always be in areas where you have a unique skill set, an edge, expertise, like your job, things like this.
Definitely.
One area that I wouldn't take any risks is compliance.
Yeah, the risk changes as you grow in business and you need to be on top of it, which is why we partner with Vanta.
Vanta automates a lot of risk processes and helps you see your risks in a centralized platform so you know what really needs your attention.
Besides risk, the main thing Vanta does is automate compliance with security protocols you need to scale, like GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and SOC 2.
The beauty of Vanta is they make it easy to prove you're compliant with these standards, saving you up to 90% of the time it takes. And on average, $500,000.
If you know what these acronyms like SOC 2 are, you probably need Vanta. You can book in a demo at vanta.com/making money. There's a link in the description.
What I'd like to ask is the credibility of these tax rises. So if you look at them and how they're staggering in, you've got coming in April, coming in 2027, coming in 2029.
Yeah.
Is it realistic that the Chancellor, probably in an election year or around an election, is going to whack up taxes on the public?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely the right question to ask because, chancellors in general of all political parties don't tend to want to be doing big tax rises and spending cuts, pre-election. They tend to want to do the opposite. What might be a bit different this time is that the threshold freezes are pretty stealthy. Most people don't notice them. And there won't be a point at which people's taxes jump up on their payslip. They just won't, inflation will carry on dragging them into more tax and more higher rates. But it won't necessarily feel like a big change on any given day. So you could argue that actually now that's baked into the system, that will just happen. Fiscal drag will just behind the scenes quietly increase tax revenues. It won't feel like a big thing on April the 5th at one day. The other taxes, things like the salary sacrifice on pension contributions being changed, the mansion tax. For the people affected, they're quite big deals. But for most people, they're not a big deal. So again, maybe you get away with that because it's a relatively small number of people being taxed. Same with the tax on electric vehicles. So I suspect you might get away with it in the sense that they will be followed through on, I expect. Or at least I can see how they could be followed through on. But it will still add to this sense of, there's lots of the pain is coming later in the election. I think actually the risks might be more, I said the OBR had this big increase in forecast revenues. What if they don't materialise? Because you don't see them in the data at the moment. You don't see this big increase in tax revenues this year so far. The OBR think they're going to come in future years. What if they actually don't materialise? Then you've got to do something about that. What if actually on the spending side, what if spending pressure keeps going? What if actually you don't want to shave back spending in the next spending review? I think in some sense the risk is more around what if a Labour government going into election wants to find more money to spend? Then what do you do? This
is typical of these kind of forecasts and the way they structure them, that it's always like, we're going to spend loads of money up front and then we're going to save money in 5 years, and then that never comes.
Yeah.
But this is like a reverse, isn't it? It's like we're going to raise tax loads, but that features into their overall budget. It all feels on the never, really.
It does. And actually, there's a cracking chart that the OBR created a while ago now, and it basically shows, and this is back from 2010, I think, so it's not just this government. Governments always basically say they're going to get the debt down. in like 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so all the forecasts show this nice like downward slope. What actually happens is this, because they always say they're going to do it in 5 years' time. When 5 years' time, it's like, oh, actually, maybe just do it.
Another 5 years.
Circumstances.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
So in some ways, you're always pushing it back. So that's one of the problems of having a fiscal rule that's always about the future. That it's always, you never get to the future in some sense, right? The future is always in a future point in time, and it's always possible to push those things back. So yeah, I think there is a danger that we get to near the election. And there's other big things, just to give you one example, defence spending. There's a commitment to raise defence spending to 3.5% of GDP. To get from where we are now to that would be about 35 billion if you wanted to get all the way. That would be a bigger tax rise than we've just had in this budget. Now, the government could just not fulfil that commitment, but if it wanted to, that's a really beefy tax increase or a spending cut somewhere else. And that's just one example of something we might want to do. I mean, you know, the NHS waiting lists are still high. There's still ageing, there's social care, there's other things. You know, it's possible that actually things will still feel not brilliant and there'll be a case for spending more or doing something different. And none of that's in the forecast right now. Right?
Do what the French do, which is 1/6 of defence spending is pensions, and that gets them to the spending requirement.
Yeah.
Just because they spend 25% of everything they spend on pensions, but like they stick it in the budget, so their Ministry of Defence budget. But go on, mate.
I want to
does
jump
that fiscal drag question
follow
as
up
well?
on the fiscal drag. You mentioned earlier that the government have been communicating everything that they've been doing and why they're doing it. But in the other way around, we have a very smart listener called Someone Smarter. And someone smarter than me said, a freeze sounds better than a tax rise to people who don't understand tax. Why is this allowed to be framed that way? And when I saw the freeze, I was like, yes. And then I was like, no, I read into it. I was like, oh, this is not good.
No.
So why do they get to the average? I mean, I'm on a podcast and I still got tricked by a finance podcast. So how is the average person meant to understand what's going on?
And we had the Rooker-Wise amendment back in the day, which like sort of banned it, and then it's got back in again.
Yeah. So basically what happens is the inflation is a tricky thing here. So what happens, think about the personal allowance. That's the point at which you start paying any income tax. And what would happen in a normal world is that you set the personal allowance, which is currently £12,000 and something, £500-ish. And then inflation happens. And when inflation happens, that gets less valuable. So you move up in line with inflation each year. So if your wages rise just with inflation, nothing happens to your tax bill. You just move up. The freeze means that you stick with it in cash terms. So the personal allowance has been £12,500 for a few years and will continue to be £12,500 for more years. So as incomes go up with inflation, so not because you've got smarter at your job or because you've worked harder, just because of inflation, more and more people get dragged into paying income tax. More of their income is subject to income tax. And the same thing happens with the higher rate threshold. That's frozen. So more people are dragged over that threshold, not because you've had progression and you've got, that might be happening too, but just because money in some is less valuable. You know, inflation means that £1 today is not worth the same as £1 tomorrow. So that's kind of what fiscal drag is. I mean, I think given the structure we have, calling it a freeze is fine, and that's what it is. You're freezing in nominal terms the structure of the tax system. It's like freezing it in time, in history. You have a historic tax system, but money is worth a different amount in future. But it's clearly a tax rise. I mean, to give you a sense of scale, if you take the freezes that were announced before this budget, they were already due. In fact, roll back a little bit further. Rishi Sunak first announced a freeze to some thresholds. At that point in time, the particular set of freezes that he announced were due to raise about 8 billion. Roll forward to just before this budget, the set of freezes that had been announced to that point were already going to rake in around 40 billion by the end of the parliament. Now this government's increased them, so they're going to raise another 14 billion. So by the end of whatever the year it is, 2030, 31, you're going to have something like 54 billion more in tax revenues than you would have had if those thresholds had just moved with inflation. Now, also worth saying that we actually don't know exactly how much it will raise because we don't know what inflation is going to be. And that's one of the problems with this whole way of doing things. I think it would be fine for the government to say, I want to change the threshold. I want to move the personal allowance down so that more people pay income tax and they pay more tax. But the government isn't saying that. It's saying, I'm going to freeze it in nominal terms, in cash terms, and I'm going to let inflation set the structure of the tax system.
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
And if it's higher, we'll get more revenue. And if it's not, well, so I think that is a very horrible way to just outsource the setting of the tax system. But it has a huge effect. I mean, we have something like, by the end of, between 2020 and 30, something like another 5 million people paying any income tax, another roughly 5 million paying higher rates of income tax. It used to be back in the early 90s that 4% of people paid a higher rate of income tax, so of like 40% or above. It's going to be something like 18%. That is a humongous change. Whether you think it's right or wrong, that is a humongous change in the shape of our system that's happened in this very... I mean, imagine if the government had stood up one day and said, I'm going to change it so that it's no longer 4% of people, it's going to be almost 20, almost one in five people paying a higher rate. That would have been like all over the front pages. But it's happened in this kind of chipping away slowly kind of way. So look, I think they get away with it partly because people don't understand it as well.
I think the cat's out of the bag a bit. Yeah. And I think that tool is becoming less effective for them and they're getting it thrown in their face.
Yeah.
I think the public are waking up to it, aren't they? Because a lot of people talk about it now.
Yeah.
It's on the BBC.
Yeah.
You know, I bang on about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's seen with real kind of... It's like you're lying.
Yeah.
You're just lying at this
people feel it
point.
now. I suppose if you do it for 1 year, you don't really feel it. Once you had it for like 10 years plus, more people realise that, hang on a minute, I didn't used to pay tax. Like it used to be the case, I can't remember the exact numbers now, that minimum wage workers who work full time didn't pay income tax. Now it's something like you only have to work about 18 hours a week on average over a year to start paying income tax. So there are whole groups of people who just thought of themselves as not taxpayers, who are now taxpayers. There are people who never thought they were anywhere close to the high rate threshold, who are now seeing that they're starting to face that 40% rate or the 100, the above 100.
Working class jobs are now higher rate taxpayers, which
so I think that's where it's, I think you're right. More people are now noticing it because it's changing things for them. And because people like us are saying, hang on a minute, this is a tax increase.
So did Labour break their promise to not increase taxes on? I know, just
they already had.
I just wanted you guys to both.
They already
say
had on the employer as an eye point.
They
have.
have.
They 100%.
But on that, I'm actually really surprised this is even a debate. Honestly, I mean, the working people thing, I think actually is a bit of a red herring. And like, I think all taxes are on working people at some point. And actually, Rachel Reeves herself said last year it's a tax on working people. So that I think is just put that to one side. Just more straightforwardly, the manifesto says no increase in national insurance. Full stop. It wasn't no increase in the rates of national, it was just no increase in national insurance. And then freezing the thresholds, including the national insurance thresholds, increases national insurance. So did the employer national insurance rise. So does the change of salary sacrifice pension contribution. I mean, after the budget measures, we will get more revenue from national insurance. People will pay more national insurance. If that isn't an increase in national insurance, what is? Yeah. So in some sense, I just think based on the kind of like fair use of the English language, it's a breach. So I'm sort of surprised that there's any debate at all about this because I don't see in what world it's not a breach, honestly. But there is apparently a debate about whether it is or not. Yeah.
There's I saw she sat down with someone the other day and carved out the state pension and said if you only receive state pension you'll never pay tax because we're getting to a point now where the state pension is going to cross over into a taxable position. What struck me about that was you said that a lot of the spending is welfare. We're essentially increasing the tax on work or on income to fund the triple lock state pension increase and pushing people into a taxable position on their state pension because of that triple lock. Would it not be easier just to say, oh, we're going to just increase the tax-free threshold at the bottom end and scrap that, not keep uplifting that triple lock?
Yeah, I mean, yes, basically. I think triple lock is an awful policy regardless. It should just go. I think whatever you think this level of the state pension should be, and people could differ on that, it's just a rubbish way to design tax policy. So another option, I mean, imagine that you wanted to keep the state pension in line with average earnings. That's basically you pick a level, say 30% or whatever level you want to pick and say, well, keep it in that. Just peg it to average earnings. And then if you want to, I mean, we did a big report on this. You could smooth it with inflation over time if you're worried about high inflation periods. You don't need this horrible ratchet effect that the triple lock gives you. So I get rid of that policy regardless of what else they want to do. But you're right, we're in this weird situation. They've said if you just earn, if a state pension just trips you into tax, you won't have to pay tax. But what about the people who get a little bit of other income? What if you get 50 quid from somewhere, I don't know, interest in your bank account or something, and therefore you're tripped over by your 50 quid plus your state pension? Well, then I think you're taxable. Yeah. So how are you going to administer this? Or what, so you're going to have a big cliff edge between people who are just in and just, I mean, I sort of agree. If someone's, just owes a couple of pounds in tax, it's sort of not worth the administration to go and collect a few quid. But the minute you have that kind of boundary, you'll have very similar people being treated very differently depending whether they have any other income. It would just be easier to just not have the personal allowance trip the state pension.
And people misunderstand tax bands anyway and how tax is treated. And you see that people believe that all of their income will be taxed at 20%. So you'll create incentives not to save so that they can be well under the line, and it's just like the wrong behaviours. Another behaviour that I want to look at with you is the salary sacrifice stuff, because again, this seems to be raise tax today from basically saying to certain groups of people, we don't want you to save into a pension so that we can then fund the pensions of people who are retired today, or the welfare bill.
Yeah.
How big a deal is the salary sacrifice thing? How bad is it going to impact people?
Yeah. So I think salary sacrifice is one of those, it's an anomaly in our current system, actually. And I think the problem I have with this big picture with this reform is that there's no good underlying justification for kind of what the government's trying to do. So at the moment, you have employee contributions. So if you and I just shove our money into a pension, that do attract national insurance contributions up front. So your employer pays national insurance before they pay your wages. You pay your employee national insurance, and then you put money into a pension. And you have these salary sacrifice contributions that basically you say to your employer, I want to put some amount of money into my pension. They reduce your salary, they do it for you, and you get a big tax relief. But not everyone gets access to that. So it's already the case that actually there are lots of employees whose employers don't offer that, and therefore they have to pay their national insurance. So I think the first question is, why do we have this big difference? Why do some people get full national insurance up front and some people get no national insurance up front, depending on whether they have an employer that offers this scheme? That just seems to me really hard to rationalise. More broadly, why are we treating employer and employee contributions so differently? I don't think there is a good reason to treat them differently. So I think you first need to decide, do you want to treat them like employer contributions and have no nicks, or employee contributions and have nicks? Once you've decided that, then you can start what to do with salary sacrifice. But before you've decided that, I think it's very bizarre, actually. So what they've done with the salary sacrifice is say, well, you can put up to £2,000 a year through this salary sacrifice mechanism, get your tax breaks. And also, for the first $2,000, you're taxed like an employer contribution, no nicks. Above that, you're taxed like an employee contribution, full nicks, with this new complexity around this £2,000 and how to administer that, which people aren't going to find easy to understand, I don't think.
Because they'll have to trip into another scheme, basically. There'll be salary sacrifice first, then
you'll have to
a normal scheme.
Then you'll have to put make employee contributions, or you have to pay your nicks on it. So you've got to work out what to do and how to manage that. I mean, look, I think salary sacrifice is odd. It's odd because not everyone gets it. But I'm not sure how capping it and having this now, like some's treated this way, some's treated that way, is very easy to understand. Bigger picture, I think what the starting question should have been, how do you want to treat pension savings? Now, on employer contributions, it is the case that they are the largest form of remuneration that never has national insurance attached to it, either on the way in or the way out. So think of income tax. There's no income tax on the way in. There is income tax on the way out after the lump sum. That makes sense. We could do that for national insurance and say, no national insurance on the way in, national insurance on the way out. I quite like that idea, honestly, for a couple of reasons. It would be simpler on the way in. It would be like no one pays national insurance on the way in, but you pay it on the way out. So it's paid at some point, but it's kind of deferred until the end. That would also mean that you could start raising tax from the people today, older people today, to contribute to the services we want, and not only from future savers. This way of doing it is basically saying we're taking away some of these tax breaks, but we're taking them away not for the people who benefited in the past. They're keeping those tax breaks. We're taking them away just for the next generation of taxpayers. Now, it's a political choice in some sense, but that is a choice. It was a choice. You could take it away from either end, and it's a choice to take it away from younger savers rather than from people who've benefited in the past. And now we have this more complicated system where we've got this kind of halfway house. So, I mean, look, is it good or bad? I think you can't answer that without the government telling us, how do you want to tax? Do you want it like an employee one or like an employer one? Because now it's just this weird halfway house. But looking through all of that, it clearly reduces the incentive to save relative to today for the people who are using salary sacrifice contributions. It's also the case that employers, including me, will have to work out what to do when they've got staff who are making big salary sacrifice contributions. One thing you could do is say, okay, we'll just give everyone higher employer contributions and lower salaries. But that also implies less choice for the individual. Because if your employer just says, well, everyone gets a higher pension contribution and a lower salary, that will be great for some, but not great for others. And lots of individuals want to vary their pension contributions over time, like you save less when you're saving for a house and you put more in at other times. So if employers do respond like that, that might sort of reduce the effect on savings, but at the expense of individuals have less choice. And that's not obviously a good thing.
Do we have the most complicated tax system in the world?
Oh, we're up there.
Good.
I mean,
Martin,
maybe there's a worse one out there. I haven't looked at all of them, but we've got to be up there, yeah.
Martin asks, how much does the complexity of the tax system cost every year? How many loopholes exist?
Oh, I haven't got a nice clean pounds billion number for you, but lots. I mean, lots and lots. I mean, it costs money in the way you would expect in the kind of just compliance costs. So individuals and businesses have to spend actual pounds money hiring accountants or lawyers or help to actually just navigate the system. That is going to be a huge cost. I mean, we're thinking, if you think of individuals, maybe it's like you have to pay your accountant, but businesses spend fortunes trying to work out like how to comply with corporate tax legislation or how to apply with VAT legislation. So that direct financial cost is going to be really big. But there's another cost, like an economic cost, where people are not purely making the best commercial decisions. They're making decisions that are driven in part by tax, and often not because the government knows best and is navigating you towards a better decision, just because it's screwing up your decision and making you do something for a tax motivated reason rather than a commercial reason. And again, all those at an individual level, they might all be relatively small. Maybe you set up through a company rather than as a self-employed person, or maybe you take a dividend out or a capital gain out rather than a wage, or they'll look small at the individual level, but run that across what we've got now, 68 million people, I don't know, millions of people, they're a really big cost. Yeah, I think the complexity of the tax system comes with a stonking great big cost. In some sense, it's a shame that people like me, there's not an easy way to put a pounds billion number on that. But if we could move to a world where you got rid of a lot of that, I think we'd have higher growth, higher productivity, higher living standards.
Yeah, the fact that tax lawyers get paid so much kind of speaks to, they shouldn't exist really. It should be easy to kind of navigate on your own, and you shouldn't have to pay millions of pounds to.
Yeah. Well, there are whole bits of tax legislation that shouldn't exist. There are lots of tax legislation that's about policing boundaries, where the government has put a really big boundary in the tax system where which side you are determines your tax treatment. And then you have all this compliance, administration trying to, like, IR35 is an example of this, where people who know about this will be like screaming at me about how much they hate it, and they should hate it. It's basically trying to work out when is a self-employed person, when they're an employee. In my mind, you should be able to literally press delete on that entire body of legislation by removing the big boundaries between people. But we don't, because we have these boundaries. And actually, salary sacrifice is another boundary. There's another boundary, or like the cash ISAs and stuff. There are all these boundaries. You've got to work out what's this side and what's that side. And it just adds a huge amount of energy.
The one boundary that I think we could have looked at was the cliff edges around, income tax, and if you exceed 100K. And I think the salary sacrifice for many people was just a way for them to not cross that level, so that they can not get a marginal tax rate that shoots up to thousands of % on kids and stuff. But they seem to have closed.
Yeah. Well, people can still do that in the sense of, if you're somebody facing that £100,000 cliff edge, especially if you're a family with children who has access to childcare, you can still make employee contributions and keep yourself below the threshold. You'll have to pay some national insurance. This is not financial advice. People should get better financial advice, but you'll have to pay some national insurance. But it will still be beneficial in plenty of cases to pay the national insurance on those contributions, but keep your childcare entitlement. So it's not that you can't save in a pension, you just can't save in the most tax efficient way. And it's still the case that it's still the end. And there's still you still like a lump sum tax. It's not a lump sum anymore, is it? But like there's still a 25% tax free element. So there is still an incentive to save in a pension. It's just been reduced.
And because it's only the NI, I want to add some balance here. Is the amount that people are going to miss out on, let's say you're whacking a full 60K a year or whatever in, is it going to be a big amount of extra tax on that?
Yeah.
Like $1,000 or whatever, is it?
Yeah, so I'm not trying to do the numbers in my head quickly. I mean, it depends on where you are. So, and also on how the employers respond. So if at the moment if you're a high rate taxpayer, you're getting tax relief on employers' national insurance contributions at 15%. But because national insurance has got this weird structure, you're only it's a 2% national insurance, employee national insurance. So in some sense, it depends what the employer does. If the employee only has to pay 2%, that's quite a small number. If what happens actually is that the employer basically reduces wages to get back that 15%, then it's a bigger deal. And I expect it'll take some time for everything to adjust. But look, for some people who are making very large contributions, it will be material, but there will still be a tax advantage to put money into a pension relative to other things. Okay,
perfect. Thank you. One narrative that I saw emerge, there's always stories around each event. And I think the big one this time was the bond market and how we're in the pocket of the bond market. You've spoken before about being radical with tax reform. We saw Liz Truss try. It didn't go that well. Do you think it's possible? to actually be bold?
Yeah. And I think it's two bits to that. I mean, yes, absolutely, I think it's possible. The bond market's a bit of a separate point in the sense that, look, we have very high debt, we have high debt interest costs. I don't think we're in hock to the bond market. What really is going on is that we can borrow more, but it comes at a really big cost. And therefore, if we do borrow more, or if the bond market investors don't believe that we're going to get our debt down, they'll just charge us more for our borrowing. And that's fine in some sense, we could just pay more, but that's really expensive. So I think keeping an eye on the bond market basically means keeping an eye on your interest rate you're being charged. And I think everyone can understand that, right? You want to borrow, but you want to know how much it's going to cost you to borrow. It's not that you can't do it, it's just that you shouldn't do it. I mean, the Liz Truss episode is a different issue because it wasn't just about changing taxes. It was having no plan for cutting, and it was throwing away institutions and stuff. Look, I think we absolutely could be bold on tax reform. I mean, it's not rocket science. People like me have been writing for decades on how to do it. I think you need the political will to make the case for a better system, to be able to say, yes, there will be losers. Here they are, but there'll be winners too. And here they are. And we're all winners from a system that's less complex, that has less compliance burden, that doesn't distort behaviour as much. But if you think technically, do we know how to reform property taxes? Yes. Do we know how to reform capital taxes? Yes. This is not rocket science. I mean, it would be fiddly. You'd need to have some new legislation. But I don't think it's beyond, the wit of people to be able to do this. I think you just need a chancellor who's got some vision and is willing to say, I'm going to make this better. And I'm going to do some things that are not just bolting on stuff on top. I'm actually going to wipe away a load of stuff. In some sense, I actually wonder if bigger is easier, in a sense. I think all the time you're doing a small thing to a small group, they feel picked on, or it feels like you're marginal. If actually you said, look, here's a reimagining of a chunk of our property tax system, or a reimagining of how we tax landlords or property income more broadly, or investment income. I almost wonder if it's easier to go bigger, start with here's how it would work, and then delete a load of stuff underneath, rather than keep trying to tweak towards it. But no, I think if we adopt the attitude that we can't do it, it's too hard, then we failed, right? If you believe you can't do it, then you can't do it. I think you have to start with a can do. Of course we can do this. Then work out how to do it, rather than always tell ourselves that, it's too hard, we can't do it, or just tweak this. I think part of that point about being ambitious for the country is about saying, of course we can do this. We do lots of complicated things. Of course we can reform the tax system.
So why is that lacking from the current government?
Yeah, and not just the current government. I mean, recent governments haven't had a great attempt at this either. I mean, the Conservatives didn't do any better in some sense. And I don't know exactly what's going on. I think partly it is political short-termism, never feeling like now's the right time. Partly it is that the public finances have been tougher in recent years. It's much harder to reform taxes while you're raising taxes than it is to reform taxes while you're doing giveaways. Because all the time you're raising taxes, you're going to make more losers, and there's more losers than winners, they shout. I think it's partly just that nobody's sort of found the political interest in it, that no one's found the way to make it a good news story. So I think it could be a good news story. I think being on your moral high horse and say, I'm doing this for a good reason, I've got a principled reason, I've got a vision, I'm going to make the country better. I think turning that into a good news story could be the way to go. And so far, no politicians, that's not the battle they're choosing to fight. So I think we should keep calling for it. I think we should keep asking our politicians to do better in some sense, but they haven't so far.
Do you not think if they did fix the council tax, for example, everyone they would understand? Even obviously the rich, wealthy people might have to pay a bit more, but don't you think everyone would say it makes sense, it hasn't been updated since 1991, This is an easy win and we can make more money for the country?
I think some people would absolutely hate it because they would have really big increases in tax bills running to the thousands of pounds, and they'd hate it, right? So I think what you'd have to do is make the principled case for it, highlight the winners. So actually there are people, people always point to the people at the top who will be paying more. There are plenty of people in parts of the country who actually, if you made it proportional, would be paying less. There are tax cuts. I mean, I think it would be easier to do it in a revenue neutral way that said, I'm not raising any money overall. This is just a pure redistribution across houses. And then you have winners as well as losers. Or, go, that's why I meant that going bigger, go full hog and actually do council tax and scrap stamp duty at the same time, so that actually people at the top get, there's some winners and some losers.
Because they might move house then and be like, we can move because we're not paying 20%.
And stamp duty is an awful tax, right? And so actually, I wonder if rather than these little bolt-on taxes, if you just said, we're going to revalue, here are the winners, here's why it's currently unfair, we're going to have this, we're going to get rid of stamp duty, whether actually that wouldn't be easier to do as one big big bang.
But it's more transparent than being like, we're going to freeze everything and then actually everyone's paying more.
I think so. I mean, I think actually just explaining things to people is actually underrated. Just tell people. I mean, not everyone's going to love it. They're not. There are plenty of people who are benefiting from the current broken tax system. And of course, when you reform it, you'll be taking it away and make some people worse off. You're not going to not make losers. But the flip of that is that there are people who are currently winning from the broken system, not because we wanted them to be winners, just because they accidental winners. And the only way to fix it is to take that away from people. So I think you have to make the principled case for it. And it is tricky because, look, people aren't tax experts. This stuff is not, conducive to a quick 10-minute BBC headline. You have to find a way to communicate it. But I think we could have a crack at that, honestly. I think someone should have a go.
But when you have the ear of the government, like they look at your research and you probably speak to people in very senior positions. They're desperate for growth and you're there saying, well, you could reform tax and get some growth there. And it's, you're not reliant on foreign investment or building massive AI data centers. You're just rewriting paper. Why are they not listening?
Yeah. And look, I think they are listening in part. There are some things, like the EVs is a good example, again, to give credit where credit's due. We've been saying for a long time at IFS that, look, you can see that fuel duties are declining, partly because of the government's own plan to get rid of electric vehicles. There is still a big cost imposed by electric vehicles in the form of congestion. You probably should start getting a tax on them, start at a small level, so at least you've got the tax to build up. And they've now bitten the bullet and they've done that, right? So it's not perfect. It's not quite how I'd have designed it, but, they've made a move. So they do make moves sometimes. I think part of it is it's quite a lot of work. And part of it is that, in some sense, you have to do quite a lot to make it show up in the forecast. So I think from the political point of view, you could do some things that I would say, great, tick, but it wouldn't be quite big enough to show up in the forecast, and therefore you couldn't really point to it in a way that's easy to explain. My point is that you shouldn't wait for those things that are really big, because there aren't many of them. You've got to do lots of small things and keep adding them up.
But that's not going to give them headrooms or...
No, I think exactly. You have to do it for the reason that says, okay, I'm not going to see it in the next 2-3 years, maybe. I won't be able to put it in the forecasts. But if you do enough of them, we'll have what really matters, which is actual growth, actual high living standards. And in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, we'll start seeing the payoff. So it's partly a political cycle point. It's partly about doing things that aren't going to show up in the next 2 years. But will show up eventually. It's one of the reasons why it's disappointing that this government hasn't done it early in the Parliament, because in some sense the easiest time to do it is right after you're elected, you've got a big majority, you've got some time for these things to start showing some effects. Once you get close to an election, saying, I'll do something that affects in 5 years' time, it's just as exciting for politicians because they're not worried about 5 years, they're worried about the election cycle. So and I think we should keep pushing because I think it's the right thing to do. But I think it's hard to get politicians excited about doing lots of small technical things that might add up.
Were you surprised there wasn't more changes to pensions? What with Torsten Bell, who was quite bold before coming a politician, he had some radical reforms, and there was a lot of rumours, wasn't there, about tax-free cash, lump sums and things like this?
Yeah. Am I surprised? I mean, look, I think the speculation about pensions is really damaging because it's a long-term investment. I think the government just needs to... ideally would have already got a plan, set it out, shut down the speculation, said, this is what we're doing, nothing else is going to change, all stop worrying about it and stop, panicking. They've got I think they call it their pension review, their pension commission. They've got some big review of pensions. So I guess they want to go away and think about it. Again, ideally they'd have done that faster. But in some sense, no, I'm not so surprised because it's a big technical area. You don't want to be doing lots of ad hoc flipping and flopping. Like salary sacrifice in some ways is part of the problem is they didn't start with what they wanted. They just start with this moving of the boundary. But it means that people keep speculating about what's going to happen. I mean, it's not just a pension tax treatment. It's also things like the state pension age and the triple lock. And I think the government's committed to keeping the triple lock for this parliament, which is sad. So no, I'm not that surprised. But I think this government and the next government just needs to get a plan for pensions, communicate it clearly, and then stop. Because I think every time people are constantly worrying about what's going to happen, it's bad for savings.
Are there any other areas of the budget that you think are damaging that we haven't touched upon? Obviously, the fiscal drag.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a relatively small one in pounds billion terms, but again, made me sort of feel a bit sad that there's been this increase in taxes on interest income, dividend income, property income. And that, for my mind, is a classic example of one of these things where if you just increase rates, you get a trade-off. So you increase rates, some of those incomes are now taxed more similarly to employment income. That reduces some distortions. You've raised some money for some people that they wanted to tax politically. but the tax base is badly designed, and therefore, because of that bad design, the higher rates mean you've disincentivized savings and investment. And the reason I'm sad about that is partly because I just don't like disincentives, but also we could have done better. We could have changed. I won't launch into a tax lecture, but we could have designed those tax bases in such a way that we didn't have to have those downside effects. So what I'd have much rather seen the government do is say, we have grappled properly with this. We've changed a set of allowances. We've designed the tax base in a way that we've written about many times before. We've done this. And now with that in place, now we can increase some rates and we won't disincentivize investment. Instead, it's just another classic. We've just put some rates up and without changing anything structural.
Did they argue? So they argue on the savings side. So this is any interest you earn on cash above the personal savings allowance that basically it's not exposed to NI. So they're kind of whacking on, but it's a return, isn't it, on an investment? There's lots of investment returns that aren't subject to NI. You might call me cynical, but do you think that the reduction of the cash ISA limit and that increase on that side is just to generate more tax revenue from cash savings than it is this point around we want people to invest, so we're going to try and push them into stocks and shares ISAs?
Yeah, overall, this is not a big budget for savings and investment, right? They've increased taxes on savings and investment, and they haven't done the tax-based reform that you would need to do to stop it being a disincentive. So it's a disincentive. On the cash ISA one, on the interest income, again, starting with the sort of big principles, I don't think actually we should be taxing that interest income at all. So stocks and shares, I'll come back to, I think they're different. But if all you're doing is putting your money into a cash ISA or a cash bank account and just saving it until tomorrow, so it's regular interest, no high returns, then I think that's just, you're being compensated for the delay in having to get your money out tomorrow. You're transferring £1 today to £1 tomorrow. And because of inflation and other things, £1 tomorrow is worth less than £1 today. And therefore, if all you're doing is smoothing your spending over time, I wouldn't tax you on that at all, actually. So I would actually have, I'd be very happy with a cash ISA that had no limit on it, or actually with no tax on interest income. Now, dividend income, property income, other investment incomes are different because they're not just transferring money to tomorrow. They're the returns to labour or effort or luck or other things. And you do want to tax those things. But on the interest income, I think it's straightforwardly moving in the wrong direction because it's increasing a tax on something I think shouldn't be taxed. On the cash ISA thing, I can see why you might think that some people are not taking advantage of stocks and shares ISAs or investments. But if the problem there isn't probably an information one, people don't have the information they need or they don't have the confidence they need to invest in it. It's not clear to me that just saying, well, I'm going to stop you saving in cash is going to help. I mean, some people will still be able to save and they'll be below the limit and therefore it'll have no effect on them. Other people will be above the cash limit, but they won't necessarily put it into stocks and shares. They might just save less overall. And there are some people that at some points in time probably should be in cash for a period. Like if you're about to buy a house, you might want your money in cash for a short period while you're doing something. So I'm not sure. It's not clear to me that it will get people investing into stocks and shares. And if it does get some people into stocks and shares, it has a cost for other people because you've manipulated their savings patterns in ways that you don't necessarily intend. And again, there's now a boundary. We now have to police the boundary and work out what's a cash saving and what's a stocks and shares saving, which might sound really obvious, but actually isn't always obvious what's cash and what's not cash. So there's been more policing around that. So it's not clear to me this is a step in the right direction. I think you could argue it's a step in the wrong direction.
Do you remember the Conservative Brit ISA plan that was floated?
Vaguely, yeah.
It was like an extra $5,000 if you only invested in UK companies.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people probably would take that now.
I would take that with both hands.
People at the time were like, oh, it's a stupid idea. But actually, it's a bit more carrot than it is stick. And, by cutting down from 20k to 12k, there's not many people saving 20k a year in cash anyway.
No.
So those kind of people that you're trying to push the other way, there might be people saving for a house, say, that you're now just penalising, and they're putting everything they possibly can in towards trying to get a house in London or whatever. At least the Brit ISA, because if the Chancellor's saying, I want investment because I want people to put money in the UK market, there's so many steps from reduced cash ISA to I'm putting money into the FTSE 100. It just doesn't seem like a
I think you've got to work out first,
line.
like, why aren't people putting more money into investments? Because there are higher returns on those investments. People are missing out on them sometimes. Why aren't they doing them? And sometimes it might be because actually they want to buy a house and they're waiting to do that. In other cases, it could be, like we said, that they don't have the information, they don't have the skills, they don't have the confidence. And actually, maybe we should tackle that more directly, help people work out, because it is a bit of a complex system. It's not entirely obvious to people how, there's lots of choice. How do you choose? What do you help them work out, how do you make those choices? How do you decide how much to put your money into safer assets, how much to put it in riskier assets, depending on your own circumstances and how much risk you can bear. I'd like to see the government helping before they try to manipulate it through these fairly blunt limits, I think.
Yeah, like the distribution of returns and how to expect them is a key one. Because if you're coming from a cash ISA position where that money just lands every month or year and you move it into the stock market and it drops 10%, you're like, what the hell? You're pulling your money straight back out again.
Yeah, which you shouldn't be doing, right? So usually, I think it's that point about helping people be ready for it rather than So I guess we'll see. But like you said, a lot of people, most people aren't lucky enough to be able to save 20 grand a year in anything, whether it's a cash ISA or anything else. So for a lot of people, this won't actually affect their limits. They're way below the £12,000 limit. It won't affect their choices. For the people who are, also people often, they're not necessarily putting the same amount of money in every year, right? You might get an inheritance one year, for example, and put a chunk of money in, but not do it every year. So now you might just wait until next year and shove it in next year. So it won't affect everybody. But for those
there are special limits. You get like a one-off limit for around certain inheritances, don't you, for ISAs, where you can use the ISA allowance. But
it's more complexity.
I was going to say, good thing it's nice and simple.
As an educator on these products, it just makes me wince at the videos that I'm going to have to make of like ISAs for beginners. And I'm like, well, you've got this scenario and this scenario, but oh no, the interest on the cash in this one and that one. And people are just going to be like, no, forget that. I'm just going to go stick it in a bank account and, pay it. And like they'll miss out, which is, I think is a real shame.
Yeah.
Have we got any more listeners' questions, mate? I think we've got that one on the back end loaded one. We've got a couple down here, this bonus question. Oh, yeah, go on. That's that Michael one.
The last one, yeah.
What's Michael got for us?
Michael.
Bit of doom and gloom, by the looks of it.
Yeah,
Just break it up.
It's not very positive.
After this.
Given the aging population, low productivity and rising public service costs, what single politically realistic policy would improve the UK's long-term outlook?
So I'm going to be unpopular and give like a politician-style answer in the sense that I think we need to stop thinking that there is a single policy that's going to do that for us. I think part of the problem is that we have this attitude like, what's the one thing we can do to move the dial? If there was that one thing, we'd have found it, right? I think this is the issue that politicians have. They're always looking for that one thing. And it just doesn't exist. You've got to just do the hard yards in lots of policy areas. Like, look, planning is an issue in this country. We're not very good we make planning whether that's for roads or houses or nuclear power plants, and the government's already tackling that. So if you had to start somewhere, I'd say that planning was a good place to start because it's so restrictive. And if you can ease that and get more building, then that will help with growth. So in some sense, they found the thing that might have been the single biggest, and hopefully they can deliver on that. Outside of that, I think take a different example. I always use a tax example. Take the education example. What's going to make us more productive? It's making sure that our young people get the skills they need to go into the future workforce. Now, that's always hard because what's the future workforce going to look like? I've got little kids. What do my little kids need to make sure that in 18 years' time they're ready for the labour market? Don't know. Yeah. So it's hard to design education policy. But we also know that the outcomes of children at the age of 5 and 6, basically you can predict very heavily and sort of worryingly heavily at that age how they'll do when they're 18. So it really matters if you get it right at that age. We need to think hard about how do you get children at all ages the right skills? How do you get them equipped for the labour market? How do you get them equipped from AI, where now AI is going to transform probably education and the skills you need? But you also need a system that doesn't flip-flop around every 6 months. So the government, has been changing a lot the further education system, the kind of vocational system. No one knows what that system is. But that's an example where there isn't a magic button there. You have to have a sensible set of plans about education, put them in place, leave them alone or have them adapt in a sensible way, and that would help. Then you have to do the equivalents on competition and regulation and everything else. So I think the message is let's not get hung up on the policy. Let's have more kind of a dogmatic, at every turn we have to be asking, how do you design this set of policies to make sure we have good investments in people and places and capital? And that if we did that systematically, I think that would move the dial. I think if we're always looking for the kind of the holy grail, the one policy that will make it all okay, we're going to be disappointed.
Okay, and the final question is, how as a citizen of this country with one vote can I kind of influence that sort of decision making? How can I make the politicians I vote for show up in that way?
Yeah, great question. I mean, look, in some ways, listening to this kind of stuff is good, right? You're getting more informed about things. I mean, I think policy advisors often say, well, we couldn't do this, voters wouldn't like it. We couldn't do that, voters wouldn't like it. And my response is always, are you sure? Have you asked them? Maybe they would. So in some sense, using whatever mechanisms you've got, whether it's, I don't know, talking to your MPs or whatever else it is, and asking for more in some sense, making it I think it needs to be, politicians needs to be able to confidently say that if I did this to tax reform, voters would like it. So I think it's partly voters, all of us, getting informed enough to not be tax experts. I'm not saying anyone should go out and do what I did, spend 18 years studying the tax system, but to know enough to be willing to kind of call for some of this stuff.
And maybe not be fooled in by people promising simple solutions to the big problem.
Yeah, because there isn't one. I mean, look, you can always think of like taking the triple lock away even. That's a big kind of totemic policy. And I do think it's a rubbish policy. I do think it should go. Actually, imagine the government had deleted it. It wouldn't have had much effect on the next 5 years, honestly, because in the next 5 years it isn't due to affect very much in terms of be very costly. Now, 50 years out, it might have a huge effect, but no one's going to get credit for that at the moment. So even if you think of these big kind of iconic policies, even then, deleting some of those wouldn't have a big effect in the here and now. You have to do them for the future. So again, I think you have to do lots of these things and call on lots of changes.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You want a biscuit? You're going to pick one of my...
I want one of these. I want one of these big ones.
Come on! You bought 3 packets of biscuits.
Yeah, you bought 300 biscuits.
No, but they're all one type. Yes, type. You bought like
help yourself to
bought
some
the whole of
lovely
booths with you.
ginger biscuits.
I feel bad enough. I feel like you've been. I wasn't
Well, you got
thinking of it
kids?
as. I do have kids.
You take a load of these home for them.
Great. I'll have a couple of caramel wafers and I'll have
What
a
we
ginger
got
biscuit.
for you? 2 off the top, 3 along the bottom.
Yeah, great. Everyone's a winner.
I'll have a caramel, mate.
I'm getting into some of these plantain chips.
No one wants one of them.
Yeah, mate. I'll eat the whole pack, mate.
No one's going for your savoury bananas, mate.
Mate, everyone go for my savoury ginger.
I'm going to try it.